Why aren't you scared, human? Her voice was a venomous hiss, eyes glowing with a fury that could burn worlds. But Jake Miller just stood there, a cocky grin plastered across his face as he coolly replied, "Because I've got a hunch I'm about to have the time of my life." And just like that, he stepped into the heart of Klythera, a death planet ruled by the most terrifying alien queen the galaxy had ever seen. No fear, no hesitation, just a reckless Texan with a deadly plan. What happens when the universe's most dangerous alien force meets a man who's never been afraid of anything? Chaos, humor, and a wild ride that could change the fate of the galaxy. If you think Jake's got what it takes, make sure to subscribe. It's free, and trust me, you don't want to miss the madness that's coming next. The asteroid belt was quiet, save for the occasional clang of metal echoing through the hollowed-out husk of Jake Miller's ship, the Second Chances. The old freighter, a rust bucket he'd picked up cheap after getting canned from his gig as a commercial pilot, floated lazily among the rocks, its engines cold and its hull patched with more duct tape than pride. Inside, the cockpit smelled of stale coffee, burnt wiring, and the faint tang of whiskey Jake swore he'd quit. He was sprawled across the pilot's chair, boots propped on the console, a wrench in one hand and a flickering holoscreen in the other. The screen wasn't showing flight diagnostics or star charts. It was playing something far less professional. "Jake, you're gonna fry the circuits watching that garbage again," came a voice from the ship's speakers, sharp and female with a hint of sass. Maggie, the ship's AI, had a knack for sounding like a disappointed older sister, even though Jake had programmed her himself. "I'm not here to babysit your bad habits." Jake grinned, not taking his eyes off the screen where a pair of animated figures danced in a way that was definitely not family-friendly. "Maggie, darling, I didn't build you to judge my taste. I built you to fly this heap and keep me company. So hush and let me enjoy my downtime." "Downtime?" Maggie snorted, her voice crackling through the static. "You've been enjoying that for 3 hours. The oxygen filters need replacing, the NAV system's glitching, and you've got half a dozen warning lights blinking. But sure, keep staring at pixelated nonsense." Jake chuckled, tossing the wrench onto the console with a clang. He was a big guy, 6'2", broad shoulders, with a mop of sandy blonde hair that always looked like he just rolled out of bed. His faded denim jacket, stitched with a Texas Longhorns patch, hung off the back of his chair. At 34, he'd seen enough of the galaxy to know most of it wasn't worth the fuel to get there. Fired from his last job for unprofessional conduct, which, in his defense, was just a little harmless flirting with passengers and one too many cockpit pranks, he'd gone freelance. Smuggling, odd jobs, whatever paid. The Second Chances was his lifeline, and Maggie was the only crew he trusted. "Relax, Mag," he said, swiping the holoscreen off. "I'll fix the filters tomorrow. Tonight's for me to unwind. Been a long week dodging pirates and tax collectors." Maggie's tone shifted a little too smug. "Unwind? Is that what you call it? That video's got more viruses than a Martian brothel. One wrong click, and I'll be scrubbing malware out of my core for days." Jake laughed, loud and rough, the sound bouncing off the cockpit walls. "Worth it. Besides, I got the best antivirus in the galaxy." He leaned back, stretching his arms until his joints popped. "Now, how about you run a scan or something useful instead of nagging me?" The AI didn't reply right away, which was unusual. Jake frowned, sitting up straighter. "Maggie, you sulking or what?" "No," she said finally, her voice dropping to a quieter, almost cautious tone. "I'm picking up something. A signal. Faint, scrambled, coming from Klythera." Jake's grin faded. Klythera wasn't just some backwater rock. It was a death trap, a planet overrun by the Zereth, a bug-like species ruled by a creature the galaxy called the Hive Sovereign. Stories about her were the kind spacers swapped over cheap drinks. A telepathic tyrant who enslaved entire species, turning their minds into extensions of her own. Most ships that went near Klythera didn't come back. Jake had heard the warnings. Hell, he'd laughed at them, but he'd never been dumb enough to test his luck. "Klythera," he repeated, swinging his boots off the console. "You sure? That's a no-fly zone. Level 10 avoidance advisory. Even pirates don't mess with it." "I'm sure," Maggie said. It's not a standard transmission. It's weird, like it's bypassing our comms and going straight into my sensors. Almost like it's alive. Jake rubbed his jaw, stubble scratching under his fingers. Alive, huh? What's it saying? It's not words, Maggie replied. It's more like a feeling, a pull. And it's got your name on it, Jake. Literally. I decoded a fragment. Jake Miller helped. He froze, the hairs on his neck prickling. Bullshit. Nobody knows me out here. I'm a nobody with a junk ship. Who the hell's calling me by name? Maggie hummed, processing. No clue. But it's coming from deep inside Klythera's atmosphere. If I had to guess, it's someone or something desperate enough to punch through a Hive Sovereign blockade just to reach you. Jake stared at the cockpit window, where the asteroid belt glittered faintly against the black. A signal with his name on it, from a planet nobody sane would touch. It sounded like a trap, or a job, or both. He should ignore it. Any Texan with half a brain would. But then he remembered the dream. It had hit him the night before, vivid as hell. A woman, or something close to one, standing in a dark, pulsing chamber. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver, catching the dim light in a way that made his breath hitch. She was tall, slender, with curves that could stop traffic on a Houston freeway. Her eyes glowed soft and fierce, like twin stars, and her voice whispered his name. Jake, help me. She'd been wearing next to nothing, just a thin layer of metallic scales that hugged her body like a second skin, leaving little to the imagination. He'd woken up sweating, heart pounding, and a stupid grin plastered on his face. Jake! Maggie's voice snapped him back. You're breathing funny. What's up? He cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Nothing. Just thinking. Had a weird dream last night. Some chick calling my name. Silver skin, killer eyes. Looked like she needed a hand. Maggie paused, then let out a low whistle. You're telling me you dreamed about a hot alien babe, and now we're getting a signal with your name on it from a death planet? That's either the galaxy's worst pickup line or a cosmic coincidence. Yeah, Jake muttered, running a hand through his hair. And I'm betting it's not a coincidence. What's the signal feel like? You said it's alive. It's scared, Maggie said slowly. Desperate, like someone screaming through a gag. There's pain in it, too, and a pull, like it's trying to drag you in. Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the console. Scared, desperate, pain. That matched the dream. The woman, alien, whatever she was, hadn't just been asking for help. She'd been begging, her voice trembling, her body tense like she was fighting something. And damn if she hadn't looked good doing it. He shook his head, trying to focus. All right, Mag, plot a course for Klythera. Let's see what's calling. Maggie's tone sharpened. You're insane. That's a Hive Sovereign world. She's got drones, telepathic nets, the works. You'll be dead before you hit the atmosphere. Maybe, Jake said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. But I've got a hunch. And if that dream's real, there's a lady out there who needs me. Can't say no to that. Lady, Maggie scoffed. You're risking your neck and my circuits for a fantasy you cooked up after too much whiskey and sketchy vids? She's probably a bug in disguise, Jake. He smirked, pulling the jacket on. If she's a bug, she's the hottest damn bug I've ever seen. Silver skin, curves like that, worth the trip just to find out. Maggie groaned. Fine. Course plotted. But when you're a drooling puppet for the Hive Sovereign, don't say I didn't warn you. And keep your hands off the controls. I don't trust you when you're this worked up. Jake laughed, heading for the tool locker. Worked up? Darlin', you don't know the half of it. He grabbed a plasma pistol and a small, clunky device he'd cobbled together months ago. A mind bait, he called it. It broadcasted fake brain signals, something he'd used to throw off pirate scans. If this Hive Sovereign was telepathic, it might just come in handy. As the second chances hummed to life, engines rumbling through the deck, Jake settled back into the pilot's chair. The dream played in his head again. Those silver curves, those glowing eyes, the way her voice had slid into his skull like a caress. His pulse kicked up, and he shifted uncomfortably. Maggie, he said, voice low, if this chick's real, and she looks half as good as she did in my head, you'll die happy? Maggie cut in, dry as dust. Damn straight, he said, grinning. Set speed to max. I've got a date with destiny, or a really good hallucination. The ship lurched forward, cutting through the asteroid belt toward Klythera. Jake's mind raced, half with strategy, half with the memory of that silver-skinned figure. Whoever she was, whatever she was, she'd picked the wrong guy to mess with, or the perfect one. He'd find out soon enough. And if it meant facing down a hive of alien bugs to see her in the flesh, hell, he'd faced worse odds in a Texas bar fight. "Hold on, sweetheart," he muttered under his breath, eyes locked on the stars ahead. "Jake Miller's coming for you." The second chances broke through Klythera's atmosphere with a shudder that rattled Jake Miller's teeth. The ship groaned like an old mule, its hull glowing cherry red from the friction, but Maggie held it steady. Outside, the planet loomed, a swirling mess of gray clouds streaked with orange, like someone had spilled a bucket of rust over a storm. Jake gripped the armrests, peering through the cockpit window as the ground came into view. Jagged spires of black rock, pulsing with faint bioluminescent veins, stretched up like claws from a nightmare. "Welcome to Klythera," Maggie announced, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Population, one psycho-human and about 1 billion bug freaks who'd love to turn your brain into soup. Weather forecast, death with a chance of more death." Jake snorted, adjusting his jacket. "Sound like a party. You got that signal locked yet?" "Still faint," Maggie said. "It's deeper in, near the central hive." "You sure about this, cowboy? Last chance to turn back and keep your skull intact." "Nope," Jake replied, standing up and slinging his plasma pistol over his shoulder. "Got a lady waiting. Can't leave her hanging." He grabbed the mind bait, a boxy little gadget with exposed wires and a blinking red light, and clipped it to his belt. "Besides, I got a plan." Maggie's tone flattened. "Your plans usually end with me scraping you off something. What's the genius move this time?" "Simple," Jake said, grinning. "I'm gonna stroll right in, let him catch me, and see what happens. This mind bait'll throw off their scans, make him think I'm dumber than I am. Then I get close to that silver-skinned gal and figure out the rest." There was a long pause. "That's not a plan," Maggie finally said. "That's a suicide note with extra steps. Call it Texas ingenuity." Jake shot back, heading for the hatch. "Fire up some music before I go. Gotta make an entrance." Maggie sighed, but the cockpit speakers crackled to life with a twangy blast of country guitar, some old Willie Nelson tune about whiskey and heartbreak. Jake cranked the volume until the ship vibrated, then punched the hatch release. The ramp dropped with a hiss, and he stepped out onto Klythera's soil, boots crunching on brittle, ash-like dirt. The air hit him like a punch, thick, humid, with a sweet-sour stench that reminded him of roadkill baking under a Texas sun. He didn't have to wait long. The ground trembled, and from behind a cluster of spires, they came, Zerith drones, 9 feet of gleaming black chitin, their serrated mandibles clicking like scissors. 6 of them, moving in perfect sync, their compound eyes glinting under the dim orange sky. Jake raised a hand, casual as if he were flagging down a bartender. "Howdy, fellas," he called over the music, Willie's voice crooning about blue eyes crying in the rain. "Love the armor. You boys polished it yourselves, or does the Queen got a detail crew?" The drones froze, their antennae twitching like they'd never heard a human talk before. One tilted its head, mandibles clacking, and a gravelly voice rasped out, "Intruder. Surrender or be processed." Jake laughed, loud and loose. "Processed? Sounds clinical. I'm here for your boss lady, tall, buggy, likes mind games. Point me her way, and we'll skip the rough stuff." He tapped the mind bait, which hummed faintly, pumping out a scrambled signal of random thoughts, taco recipes, football scores, and a stray memory of a barmaid he'd flirted with in Dallas. The drones chittered to each other, confused. One repeated, "Tacos," in a bewildered tone, its antennae quivering. Another stepped forward, claws raised, but hesitated, like it wasn't sure if Jake was a threat or a lunatic. He figured the mind bait was doing its job, muddying their telepathic link just enough to throw them off. "Yep, tacos," Jake said, spreading his arms. "Best damn food in the galaxy. Now, how about you take me to your queen? I've got a delivery for her, special package, straight from Texas." The lead drone loomed closer, its shadow swallowing him. You will be taken, it growled. Resist, and your flesh will feed the hive. Fair enough, Jake said, dropping his hands like he was surrendering. Lead on, big guy. But fair warning, the last fella who locked me up ended up singing karaoke with me. Badly. The drones surrounded him, their claws clicking as they formed a tight circle. Jake kept his grin, even as a claw nudged his back, shoving him forward. The music faded as the second chances powered down behind him, Maggie muttering something about dumbass humans over the comms. He didn't care. Step 1 was done. He was in. Now, he just had to survive long enough to find her. The trek to the hive was a blur of twisted tunnels and glowing walls. The drones marched him through a labyrinth of organic corridors, their surfaces slick and pulsing like living flesh. The air grew heavier, the stench sharper, and Jake's boots squelched on a floor that felt disturbingly soft. Every few steps, he caught glimpses through arched openings, chambers lined with cocooned figures, their outlines barely visible in the blue-green glow. Aliens, he guessed, trapped in the Sovereign's grip. His stomach tightened, but he kept talking. Nice place, he said, nodding at a wall that throbbed like a heartbeat. Real cozy. But it's a hit with the ladies. Well, the ones who like bugs and bondage. The drone behind him shoved harder, nearly knocking him over. Silence, human. It snapped, but its antennae twitched, like it was annoyed, not just obedient. Jake filed that away. If these things could get irritated, maybe they weren't as mindless as they looked. Then he felt it, a tug in his chest, faint but real, like a thread pulling tight. His breath caught, and the dream flashed back. Her silver skin, those glowing eyes, the way her voice had wrapped around his name. Jake, help me. He stopped walking, ignoring the drone's jab, and closed his eyes. There was again a pulse, a whisper, coming from deeper in the hive. Hey, ugly, he said, turning to the lead drone. Your boss got a VIP locked up somewhere? Shiny skin, killer curves? I'm getting a vibe. The drone's eyes narrowed, a low hiss escaping its mandibles. You sense the conduit, it said, voice like rocks grinding together. She is the Sovereign's tool. You will not reach her. Conduit, ou? Jake muttered, filing that away too. Sounds important. Let's see how this plays out. They shoved him into a larger tunnel, and the walls opened into a chamber that stopped him cold. It was massive, a cathedral of flesh and light, with a ceiling lost in shadows. At the center, suspended in a web of glowing tendrils, was her, the woman from his dream. Lena. Her silver skin shimmered under the bioluminescent haze, her body wrapped in thin, pulsing cords that held her upright. She was alive, but barely, her head slumped, her chest rising slow and shallow. The cords dug into her arms and legs, accentuating every curve in a way that made Jake's throat go dry. Hot damn, he whispered, unable to help himself. She was even better than the dream, tall and lean, with a grace that didn't belong in this hellhole. The cords clung to her like a lover's hands, and for a split second, he imagined cutting them away, his fingers brushing that smooth, cool skin. He shook his head, cursing under his breath. Focus, Jake. Not the time. The drones pushed him forward, toward a platform at the chamber's far end. Lena's eyes flickered open, glowing faintly, and locked onto his. The tug in his chest turned into a jolt, sharp and electric, and her voice hit him again, not out loud, but inside his skull. Jake, you came. He stumbled, catching himself against a drone's claw. Yeah, darlin', he muttered, grinning despite the situation. Couldn't say no to a face like that. The drones chittered, sensing something, but before they could react, the air shifted. A shadow loomed from the platform, a massive, gleaming figure, all sharp edges and clicking limbs. The Hive Sovereign had arrived. The Hive Sovereign descended from her platform like a storm made flesh, her segmented body gleaming with a metallic sheen that caught the chamber's eerie blue-green light. She was enormous, twice the size of her drones, with an elongated head crowned by a nest of writhing antennae, each tip pulsing with faint orange sparks. Her legs, long and blade-sharp, clicked against the organic floor, sending echoes through the vast space like a butcher sharpening knives. Jake stood his ground, hands loose at his sides, but his heart kicked up a notch. This wasn't just a bug. This was a predator, and he'd just walked in her web. "Well, ain't you a sight?" he said, tilting his head with a grin he didn't quite feel. "Big gal like you must throw one hell of a barbecue. Got any spare ribs in this joint?" The Sovereign's compound eyes locked onto him, hundreds of tiny facets reflecting his cocky stance. A smaller drone scuttled to her side, its voice a grating buzz. "You stand before the Hive Sovereign, ruler of Klythera, the Mind Weaver, the—" Yeah. Jake cut in, waving a hand. "Queen of the creepy crawlies. I get it. Can we skip the titles and get to the part where you tell me why I'm here? I've got a beer waiting back on my ship." The drone's antennae quivered, clearly offended, but the Sovereign silenced it with a flick of one claw. She leaned forward, her massive form casting a shadow that swallowed Jake whole, and her voice hissed through the air, low, rough, like sand scraping over glass. "You amuse me, human. A rare trait. Most tremble, most beg. Yet you—" her antennae pulsed faster, probing the edges of his mind. "You stand unafraid." Jake shrugged, keeping his tone light, even as a cold prickle ran down his spine. "Lady, I'm from Texas. This ain't even the weirdest thing I've seen this week. Had a run-in with a three-headed coyote once. Now, that was a party pooper." Her head tilted, antennae brushing the air inches from his face. He caught a whiff of her, rotten honey and copper, sharp enough to make his eyes water. "Curious," she hissed, circling him slow and deliberate, her claws clicking a steady rhythm. "Your kind is scarce in my domain. Primitive, weak, yet you come alone, unarmed, into my hive." "Who says I'm unarmed?" Jake smirked, tapping his temple. "Got a whole arsenal up here, darlin'. You'll see soon enough." The Sovereign paused, her eyes narrowing. Bold words. Others have boasted. Warriors, scholars, telepaths. All now serve me. She gestured with a claw, and the chamber's walls pulsed brighter, illuminating the figures trapped in their cocoons along the edges. Dozens of them. Aliens of every shape, their bodies still, their eyes hollow but alive, locked in silent screams. Jake's gut twisted, but he kept his face neutral. "Nice collection," he said, nodding at the captives. "Real interior decorator vibe, though they look a little stiff. Maybe loosen him up with some line dancing." Her antennae twitched, amusement, maybe, or irritation. "They are not dead," she said, her voice taking on a smug edge. "They are perfected. Their minds feed my will. Their knowledge builds my empire." She swept a claw toward Lena, still suspended in her web of tendrils. "This one, the conduit, amplifies my reach. A rare specimen. Beautiful, is she not?" Jake's eyes flicked to Lena, and his breath hitched. Up close, she was a damn vision, silver skin glinting like moonlight, her body taut against the cords that held her. They wrapped her arms and thighs, digging in just enough to highlight every curve, and for a moment he imagined those tendrils were his hands, tracing her skin, feeling that cool, smooth warmth. He swallowed hard, shaking the thought loose. "Yeah," he said, voice rougher than he meant. "Beautiful's one word for it. Shame you've got her trussed up like a Thanksgiving turkey." The Sovereign's head snapped back to him, her tone sharpening. "You desire her." It wasn't a question. Her antennae pulsed again, brushing his mind, and Jake felt a faint tug, like she was testing him, tasting him. "Intriguing. A weakness I can exploit." "Desire?" Jake laughed, loud and brash, covering the heat creeping up his neck. "Lady, I've got a pulse. She's a knockout. But I'm here to talk, not drool." He stepped forward, closing the gap between them, and her drone's tensed claws rising. "So let's cut the chit-chat. What's your game? You gonna try cracking my head open like the rest of these poor bastards?" The Sovereign reared up, towering over him, her presence crushing the air from the room. "You will join them," she said, her voice a low rumble. "A human mind, unrefined, chaotic, will be a novel addition. I have absorbed warriors of steel, thinkers of crystal, poets of light. You'll be mine." "Hard pass," Jake said, crossing his arms. "Not big on the whole mind slave aesthetic. Looks uncomfortable as hell." He glanced at Lena again, her glowing eyes meeting his, and that jolt hit him harder, sharp, urgent, like a hand grabbing his chest. "Jake, hurry!" Her voice whispered through his skull, faint but desperate, and he clenched his jaw. The Sovereign lowered her face until it was inches from his, her breath hot and sour against his skin. "Why don't you fear me, human?" she hissed, genuine curiosity threading through her menace. "What makes you so insolent?" Jake met her gaze, unflinching, and let his grin widen. "Because I know something you don't, Queenie. You're about to stick your fancy brain probe into the wrong damn toolbox." He tapped his temple again, voice dropping low. "Trust me, you're going to regret opening this can of worms." For a split second, something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or arrogance too stubborn to care. "We shall see," she said, and one of her claws shot forward, its tip glowing as it aimed for his forehead. Jake didn't flinch. He'd been counting on this, her pride, her need to dominate. The mind bait hummed louder at his hip, feeding her a teaser of static and nonsense, but the real show was coming. The claw touched his skin, and the world exploded into chaos. It started small, a flicker in his head, like a radio tuning to a bad station. Then the floodgates opened. First came the memes, fast and relentless. A screeching, "I diagnose you with skill issue," blasted through the connection, followed by a deep-fried image of a cowboy riding a taco into the sunset. The Sovereign staggered, her massive frame jolting like she'd been slapped. What is this?" she gasped, her royal tone cracking. Jake grinned wider, leaning into it. "Just the appetizer, darling. Buckle up." Next came the heavy stuff. A pop-up ad screamed in her mind. "Hot queens in your hive. Click now." And she recoiled, claws slashing the air as if she could swat it away. But it kept coming, layering over itself. Grow your claws in 3 easy steps, and a looping video of a scantily clad Lena, his imagination running wild, spinning in slow motion, her silver skin catching non-existent light. The Sovereign's antennae spasmed. This is obscene," she hissed. "Why is she bare? Why do I feel heat?" "Welcome to my brain," Jake said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It's a mess in here. Hope you brought a mop." She snarled, driving deeper, and hit the jackpot, or the trash heap, depending on your view. A flood of Texas bar memories poured out. Jake two-stepping with a curvy redhead, her hands on his chest, his on her hips, the air thick with sweat and cheap beer. The Sovereign stumbled again, her claws scraping the floor. "Stop this," she demanded, but her voice wavered, caught between disgust and something else, confusion, maybe fascination. "Nope," Jake said, stepping closer as she faltered. "You want it in, you're in. Enjoy the ride." The chamber trembled, the walls pulsing faster, and Lena's eyes flared brighter. The game was on, and Jake was just getting started. The Hive Sovereign's psychic claw sank deeper into Jake Miller's mind, and the chamber around him blurred, as if the walls themselves were melting. Her presence was a battering ram, relentless, cold, and heavy with the weight of 1,000 conquered minds. But Jake didn't buckle. He stood there, boots planted on the squishy floor, grinning like a man who'd just drawn a winning hand in a barroom poker game. The Sovereign might have thought she was in control, but she'd just stepped into the wildest rodeo of her long, buggy life. "Come on in, Queenie," Jake said aloud, his voice echoing through the pulsing cathedral of flesh. "Water's fine. Mind the mess, though. I ain't cleaned up in a while." Her antennae thrashed, and her hiss filled the air, sharp enough to cut glass. "Your insolence ends here, human. Your thoughts are mine to claim." But there was a hitch in her tone, a crack widening with every second she spent digging through his skull. She'd expected fear, order, something she could bend and break. Instead, she got Jake Miller, a Texas-sized tornado of chaos, and he was only warming up. The memes hit first, just like he'd planned. A deafening, "I diagnose you with skill issue," roared through the psychic link, loud enough to make the Sovereign's massive frame jerk back. Her claws scraped the floor, carving jagged lines in the organic muck. Before she could recover, a grainy, deep-fried image slammed into her. A cowboy riding a taco across a neon desert, waving a lasso made of pixelated bacon. She staggered, her compound eyes flickering like a busted hollow screen. "What is this madness?" she rasped, her royal composure splintering. "Your mind defies reason." Jake chuckled, hands on his hips. "Reason? Darlin', I left that back in Houston with my last paycheck. This is just the welcome mat. Hope you brought your dancing shoes." She snarled, doubling down, her psychic grip tightening like a noose. That's when Jake opened the floodgates wider, letting the real heavy hitters loose. A pop-up ad blared into her consciousness. "Hot queens in your hive. Click now." Complete with a looping jingle that sounded like a used car salesman on helium. The Sovereign slashed at the air, as if she could claw this sound away, but it stuck, layering over itself. "Grow your claws in 3 easy steps," chimed in next, followed by a flashing banner. "Only 9.99 credits. Act fast." "Cease this," she bellowed, her voice booming through the chamber. The walls pulsed faster, the trapped aliens in their cocoons twitching faintly, like they could feel the chaos leaking through. But Jake wasn't stopping. He leaned into it, picturing the next salvo with a grin that'd make a devil blush. The Sovereign's mind reeled as an image flickered into focus. Not real, but straight from Jake's imagination. It was Lena, the silver-skinned beauty, hanging in her web of tendrils. Only now she wasn't bound. She spun slow and deliberate, her body bare except for a shimmer of light that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her glowing eyes locked onto an invisible Jake, lips parting in a sultry whisper, "Come get me, cowboy." The Sovereign's antennae froze, then spasmed wildly. This is obscene," she choked out, her claws curling inward. "Why is she uncovered? Why does her form stir me?" Her voice trembled, caught between disgust and a flicker of something else, confusion, maybe lust, twisted through her alien senses. Jake laughed, loud and rough, the sound bouncing off the chamber's walls. "That's the million-credit question, ain't it? Welcome to the human brain, Queenie. 90% nonsense, 10% trouble, and you're getting the full tour." She roared, a sound like metal tearing apart, and plunged deeper, desperate to find something, anything, she could use. Big mistake. Jake's mind shifted gears, dragging her into a memory he'd polished like a favorite story. It was a sticky summer night in a Texas dive bar, the air thick with cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. He was two-stepping with a redhead in a tight skirt, her hands sliding up his chest, his gripping her hips as the jukebox wailed a George Strait tune. Their bodies pressed close, sweat slicking their skin, her breath hot against his ear as she whispered something filthy he'd never repeat in church. The Sovereign stumbled, her massive legs buckling for a split second. "What is this heat?" she gasped, her antennae drooping. "This closeness, this desire? It's chaos." "Damn right it's chaos," Jake said, stepping closer to her faltering form. "That's what you get for waltzing into my head uninvited. Hope you like country music, 'cause there's more where that came from." Her eyes narrowed, glinting with fury, and she pushed harder, clawing through the haze for control. That's when she hit the next layer, a flood of internet garbage Jake had spent years collecting like a digital hoarder. A video looped in her mind, 2 shadowy figures, barely dressed, tangled in a scene he'd stumbled across on a shady site late one night. It wasn't explicit, just blurry enough to dodge a censor's axe. But the sounds, the moans, the raw energy hit her like a freight train. Why are they entwined?" she stammered, her royal poise crumbling. "This is degrading. Yet, why can't I look away?" Jake shrugged, casual as if they were chatting over coffee. "Beats me, Queenie. Humans are weird. We've been churning out stuff like that since the dial-up days. Keeps us entertained, and apparently, it's messing with your head real good." The chamber shook, the bioluminescent veins flickering as her focus slipped. Up in her web, Lena's head lifted higher, her glowing eyes sharpening. Jake felt her again, that tug, stronger now, pulling at his chest like a rope. "Jake, fight!" Her voice cut through the noise, faint but fierce, and he clenched his fists. She was still in there, still kicking, and he'd be damned if he let her down. The Sovereign sensed it too. Her head snapped toward Lena, then back to Jake, a low growl rumbling from her throat. "The conduit calls to you," she said, her tone venomous. "She's mine, my tool, my power. You will not have her." "Funny," Jake shot back, "'cause I'm betting she's got other plans. And me? I'm just a guy dumb enough to help her out." He tapped the mind bait on his belt, its hum growing louder, feeding her more static. Football plays, bad pickup lines, a recipe for chili so spicy it'd peel paint. Her drones shifted uneasily, their claws clicking faster, like they could feel their queen's grip faltering. The Sovereign reared up again, towering over him, her psychic assault surging like a tidal wave. "Enough games," she roared. "I will break you. Human, strip your mind bare and claim every fragment." Jake met her gaze, unflinching, and let his grin turn wicked. "Break me? Sweetheart, you ain't seen nothing yet." He closed his eyes for a split second, digging into the deepest, darkest corner of his head, the place he'd kept locked even from himself. Then he unleashed it. A flood of pure, unfiltered madness poured out. A jingle screamed, "Extended warranty for your hive? Call now." Overlaid with a memory of him skinny dipping in a creek, water cold against his skin, a girl's laughter echoing in the distance. Then came Lena again, his imagination running wilder. She was free, standing in front of him, silver skin glistening, her hands sliding up his arms as she leaned in close, her breath warm against his neck. "You're trouble," she whispered in his mind's eye, and he could almost feel her, that cool, warm touch driving him nuts. The Sovereign shrieked, a sound that rattled the chamber's walls, her claws slashing blindly. "Stop this," she cried, her voice fracturing. "This heat, this noise, it's unbearable." Jake opened his eyes, stepping forward as she flailed. "Told you, Queenie. My head's a damn circus. And you just bought a front row ticket." The drones chittered in panic, their movements jerky, and Lena's tendrils pulsed brighter. The game was tilting, and Jake was about to go all in. The Hive Sovereign's shriek still hung in the air, a jagged edge of sound that made the chamber's walls quiver like a living thing in pain. Her claws flailed, carving wild arcs through the organic floor, and her drones skittered back, their synchronized march breaking into a frantic scramble. Jake Miller stood at the center of it all, unshaken, his grin sharp as a switchblade. The Sovereign's psychic grip on his mind was slipping. She'd barged in expecting a quick victory, but now she was drowning in the mess of his head, and Jake was loving every second of it. "Having fun yet, Queenie?" he called, his voice cutting through her wail like a lasso snapping tight. "Told you my brain's a circus. Guess you're the clown now." Her compound eyes blazed, hundreds of facets glinting with fury and confusion. This cannot be," she hissed, her massive frame trembling as she fought to regain control. "No mind resists me. No species defies the hive." But her antennae drooped, twitching erratically, and Jake knew he had her on the ropes. Time to throw the knockout punch. He closed his eyes again, digging deeper into the chaos he'd spent a lifetime building. Every dumb idea, every late-night scroll, every reckless moment he'd laughed off. "All right, darling," he muttered. "Let's turn up the heat." Then he let it rip. A tidal wave of insanity crashed into her. First came the earworms, a mashup of every annoying jingle he'd ever heard, blasting at once. Baby Shark collided with Sweet Home Alabama, underpinned by a car, ad screaming, "Zero down, drive off today." The Sovereign's head jerked back, her claws clutching at nothing as the noise ricocheted through her psyche. What is this torment?" she gasped, her voice splintering. "Just the warm-up," Jake said, stepping closer, his boots squelching on the floor. "Here's the main course." Next came the internet's underbelly, a barrage he'd honed from years of dodging sketchy pop-ups and questionable links. A flood of spam hit her. "Hot singles in your sector. Click here." Followed by a fake survey. "When a free Hive upgrade, just enter your galactic ID." She slashed at the air, her royal dignity crumbling. "I closed it," she roared, but the ads multiplied, relentless. "Extended warranty for your throne?" Only 19.99 credits, echoed in her mind, and Jake swore he saw her antennae curl in defeat. Then he went for the jugular. A memory flared up, not real, but vivid as hell. Lena, free from her tendrils, standing in front of him under a Texas sunset. Her silver skin glowed, bare except for a faint shimmer, and she stepped close, her hands sliding up his chest, fingers cool and firm against his shirt. In his mind's eye, she tilted her head, lips brushing his ear, her voice a husky whisper. "You're a mess, Jake, but I like it." Her body pressed against his, curves fitting like they were made for him, and he could almost feel the heat of her breath, the electric hum of her touch. The Sovereign staggered, her legs buckling as the image burned into her. This heat," she choked out, her voice a mix of horror and fascination. "Why does she touch you? Why do I feel this pull?" Her antennae spasmed, drooping lower, and Jake caught a flicker in her eyes, something alien but close to hunger. "Beats me," he said, grinning wider. "That's the human special. Chaos with a side of charm. You're welcome." He didn't let up, piling on more. A bar scene flashed next. Him and that redhead again, her nails digging into his back as they stumbled into a dark corner, the air thick with whiskey and what. The Sovereign's claws curled inward, her hiss turning shrill. "This closeness, it's unbearable." "Unbearable's my middle name." Jake shot back, his voice steady despite the strain of holding the mental flood. "You wanted in, you got in. Deal with it." The chamber shook harder, the bioluminescent veins flickering like a dying bulb. Up in her web, Lena's head snapped up, her glowing eyes locking onto Jake's. The tug in his chest turned into a full-on yank, sharp and urgent, and her voice cut through the noise again. "Jake, now, please." It was raw, desperate, and it hit him like a slug of bourbon, warm, hard, and straight to the gut. He glanced at her, bound in those tendrils, silver skin taut and shimmering, and his throat tightened. She was fighting, clawing her way out of the Sovereign's grip, and he'd be damned if he let her do it alone. "Hang on, darlin'," he muttered, then turned back to the Sovereign, who was swaying like a drunk on a bar stool. "Hey, Queenie, you're missing the best part." Her head snapped toward him, fury blazing, but she was too late. Jake triggered the mind bait on his belt, its hum spiking into a whine. The gadget pumped out a fresh wave of nonsense. Football stats, a recipe for jalapeno cornbread, and a looping video of a cat falling off a couch. But buried in the static was a signal, sharp and targeted, aimed straight at Lena. "Wake up, gorgeous," he thought, pushing it through the link. "You're hotter when you're free. Let's burn this place down." The Sovereign sensed it, her eyes widening. "No," she roared, lunging toward him, claws outstretched. But the damage was done. Lena's tendrils pulsed, cracks splintering along their length, and her voice surged louder in Jake's head. "Jake, I feel you." The air crackled, and the Sovereign's psychic hold faltered, a fracture splitting her control. Jake dodged her claws, rolling to the side as they gouged the floor where he'd stood. "Too slow, Queenie," he yelled, springing back up. "Looks like your VIP's checking out." The Sovereign whirled toward Lena, her growl shaking the chamber. "She is mine," she bellowed, and a wave of telepathic force slammed into Jake, heavy as a truck. He grunted, knees buckling, but held his ground, grinning through the pain. "Yours? Nah, she's got better taste than that." Lena's tendrils snapped, one, then another, her silver arms flexing as she tore free. The Sovereign shrieked again, her antennae thrashing, and Jake seized the moment. He unleashed one last mental barrage, a supernova of absurdity. A jingle blared, call 1-800-HIVE and OW for a free consultation, mixed with a memory of him skinny dipping, water sliding over his skin, and Lena's imagined voice purring, "Come get me, cowboy." Then came the kicker. A blurry clip from a late-night scroll, two figures tangled in a frantic dance, their gasps echoing in the Sovereign's mind. She collapsed, claws digging into the floor, her voice a broken rasp. This heat, this noise. I cannot." Her antennae drooped completely, and the drones froze, their chittering silenced as the hive's psychic network stuttered. Lena ripped the last tendril away, landing on the floor with a grace that made Jake's heart skip. Her silver skin shimmered, her chest heaving, and those glowing eyes fixed on him. "Jake," she said aloud, her voice soft but firm, like silk over steel. "You're insane." He laughed, brushing dirt off his jacket. "Texas insane, darlin'. Best kind there is." He nodded at the Sovereign, slumped and twitching. Looks like she didn't like the show. Lena stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the muck, and Jake's pulse kicked up. Up close, she was a damn knockout, tall, lean, with a body that could stop a stampede. Her silver skin caught the light, and for a second, he pictured her in that imagined sunset, hands on him, lips close. He shook it off, grinning. "You okay?" "Better now," she said, her eyes flickering with something warm. You're a mess." "Always," he replied, winking. "Now let's finish this bug bash." The Sovereign stirred, her claws scraping weakly, but the chamber was shifting, cracks spreading, drones stumbling. Jake's circus had cracked her wide open, and Lena was ready to take the stage. The Hive Sovereign slumped against the chamber's pulsing floor, her once imposing form reduced to a trembling heap of chitin and desperation. Her claws scraped weakly at the muck, leaving shallow grooves, and her antennae hung limp, twitching like broken wires. The air crackled with the aftershocks of her shattered psychic grip, the bioluminescent veins in the walls flickering erratically as if the hive itself was short-circuiting. Jake Miller stood a few feet away, hands on his hips, grinning like he'd just won a bar bet with the devil. Lena, free at last, stepped beside him, her silver skin glinting under the dim light, her glowing eyes sharp with a fire that made his pulse jump. "Looks like the show's over, Queenie," Jake said, his voice ringing through the chaos. "Hope you enjoyed the Texas special. Chaos, charm, and a side of crazy. No refunds." The Sovereign's head jerked up, her compound eyes dim, but still burning with defiance. This is not the end," she rasped, her voice a fractured echo of its former menace. "My hive spans this world, millions of drones, endless tunnels. You cannot undo me with this." Her claw gestured vaguely at Jake, as if his very existence was an insult. Jake laughed, loud and loose, the sound bouncing off the trembling walls. "Undo you? Darlin', I just gave your brain a front-row seat to the internet's worst hits. You're the one who couldn't handle it." He glanced at Lena, her silver curves catching his eye, and added, "Plus, I've got backup now. Ain't that right, gorgeous?" Lena's lips twitched, almost a smile, but too fierce to be soft. "You're a fool, Jake Miller," she said, her voice smooth and strong, cutting through the hive's hum. "But a useful one." She stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the slick floor, and the Sovereign flinched, her claws curling inward. Jake raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Useful, huh? I'll take it. Beats insane, though I'm guessing that's still on the table." He nodded at the Sovereign. "So what's the play?" "She's down, but she ain't out." Lena's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter as she stared at the Sovereign. "Her mind is weakened, her control fractured. I felt it when you overwhelmed her." Her gaze flicked to Jake, a flicker of something warm in those star-like eyes. "Your thoughts, they're a weapon. I can use them." "Use them," Jake said, grin widening. "Darlin', you've got a backstage pass to the Jake Miller circus. Pick your poison, memes, bar fights, or..." He trailed off, his mind flashing to that imagined sunset, her silver hands on his chest, her breath hot against his neck. He cleared his throat, shifting his stance. Whatever works." The Sovereign growled, a low rumble that shook the floor, and dragged herself upright, her massive frame swaying. "You will not mock me," she snarled, her voice ragged but fierce. "My hive endures, my will endures." She slammed a claw into the ground, and the chamber shuddered, cracks splintering through the walls. From the tunnels beyond, a new sound rose, a skittering roar, like 1,000 boots stomping in unison. Jake's grin faded, his hand dropping to his plasma pistol. "Company's coming," he muttered, glancing at Lena. "Guess she's calling the cavalry." Lena tensed, her silver skin rippling as if she could feel the hive stirring. "Not drones," she said, her voice tight. "Mutants, hybrids of her conquered species. Stronger, less dependent on her mind. She's desperate. Desperate's my kind of fight," Jake said, pulling the pistol free and checking its charge. "Let's see how they like a taste of Texas lead." He spun the weapon on his finger, then froze as the tunnel openings erupted with movement. Shapes poured in, twisted, hulking figures, their bodies a grotesque mash of chitin and alien flesh. Some had claws like scythes, others sported tentacles tipped with barbs, all moving with a jerky, feral grace that set his nerves on edge. The Sovereign laughed, a wet, guttural sound. "You see, human, you cannot win. Your tricks are nothing against my flesh and blood." Jake fired a shot, the plasma bolt sizzling through the air and punching a hole in the nearest mutant's chest. It dropped, twitching, but three more took its place, their roars shaking the chamber. "Tricks, huh?" he yelled, backing toward Lena. "Let's test that theory." He tapped the mind bait on his belt, its hum spiking, and aimed a fresh signal at her. Not the Sovereign this time, but Lena. "Take it, darling," he thought, pushing hard. "Burr her down." Lena's eyes flared, catching the signal like a spark to gasoline. She raised a hand, silver fingers trembling, and a wave of psychic energy rippled out. Not hers alone, but laced with Jake's chaos. The mutants froze mid-step, their roars cutting off as their heads jerked side to side. One dropped to its knees, clawing at its skull, while another let out a garbled scream. "Hot singles in my area?" Jake blinked, then laughed so hard he nearly missed a swing from a tentacle. "Holy hell, it worked!" he shouted, ducking and firing again. "You're broadcasting my brain, Lena. Keep it coming." The Sovereign's eyes widened, her claws digging deeper into the floor. "No," she bellowed, lunging toward Lena, but her movements were sluggish, her psychic walls crumbling. Lena sidestepped, graceful as a dancer, and sent another wave, Jake's voice echoing through it. "Grow your claws in 3 easy steps." The mutants stumbled, some collapsing, others slashing at the air like they could fight off the invisible adze. Jake grinned, adrenaline pumping. "That's it, Queenie, your pets are getting the premium package." He fired again, dropping a mutant with a barbed tail, then spun to Lena. "Hit her with the good stuff. I've got plenty to share." Lena nodded, her breath quickening, and closed her eyes. The air thickened, charged with a hum that made Jake's skin tingle. Then she unleashed it, a blast straight from his mind, amplified through her telepathic strength. The Sovereign froze as a new vision slammed into her. Lena, silver and bare, stepping out of that imagined sunset, her hands sliding up Jake's arms, her body pressing close. In his head, she whispered, "Let's finish this," her lips brushing his jaw, her touch cool and electric, sending a shiver down his spine. The Sovereign reeled, claws slashing blindly. "This heat," she gasped, her voice breaking. "This closeness, I cannot." Her antennae curled, and a flood of Jake's bar memories piled on. Sweaty skin, tangled limbs, a redhead's nails raking his back. The Sovereign's legs buckled, her roar turning into a whimper. Stop it." "Nope," Jake said, advancing as she faltered. "You wanted my head, you got it, all the messy parts included." He glanced at Lena, her silver form glowing brighter, and his pulse skipped. Damn, she was something fierce, gorgeous, and throwing his own chaos like a pro. He pictured her again, free and close, her hands on him, and pushed that thought through the link. "Give her hell, darling." Lena's eyes snapped open, and she thrust both hands forward. The Sovereign screamed as the final blow hit. A supernova of Jake's worst internet finds. A jingle blared. Call 1-800-HIVE-NOW, mixed with a blurry clip of 2 figures in a frantic tangle, their gasps loud and raw. Then came the kicker. Lena's imagined voice, husky and low, purring, "You're done, Queenie," as her silver hands tightened around an invisible throat. The Sovereign collapsed fully, her massive body crashing to the floor with a wet thud. The mutants froze, then dropped, their twisted forms twitching as the hive's psychic network imploded. The walls pulsed once, twice, then dimmed, the light fading to a sickly gray. Silence fell, heavy and thick, broken only by Jake's ragged breathing and the faint hum of the mind bait. He holstered his pistol, wiping sweat from his brow, and turned to Lena. She stood there, chest heaving, silver skin slick with effort, her glowing eyes locked on him. "You're a monster," she said, but her tone was warm, almost amused. Jake grinned, stepping closer. "Texas monster, darlin'. Best kind there is." He nodded at the Sovereign's crumpled form. "She's down for the count." "What now?" Lena's gaze hardened, flicking to the tunnels. "The hive's breaking. We need to free the others before it collapses." "Lead the way," Jake said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still buzzing in his veins. "I've got your back, and a few more tricks on my sleeve." The chamber groaned, cracks widening, and the fight wasn't over yet. The chamber groaned louder, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through Jake Miller's boots and up his spine. Cracks spiderwebbed across the organic walls, oozing a thick, amber sap that smelled like burnt sugar and death. The Hive Sovereign lay crumpled in the center, her massive form twitching faintly, her once proud antennae sagging like wilted stalks. The mutants, those twisted hybrids she'd unleashed, sprawled lifeless around her, their jerky spasms fading into stillness as the hive's psychic network unraveled. Jake wiped sweat from his brow, his plasma pistol still warm in his hand, and turned to Lena. She stood beside him, silver skin shimmering with a faint sheen, her glowing eyes scanning the chaos with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "Guess we broke her toy box," Jake said, holstering his weapon with a flourish. "Texas 1, Bug Queen 0. How's that for a score?" Lena's lips curved, just a hint of a smile, sharp and dangerous. "You're insufferable," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in the air. "But effective. The hive's fracturing. Her control is gone. We need to move." "Move where?" Jake asked, stepping closer to her. Up close, she was a damn sight, tall and lean, her silver curves catching the dying light like a star about to ignite. His mind flickered to that imagined moment, her hands on him, her breath hot and close, and he shoved it down with a grin. "I'm game, darlin'. Let on." She pointed to the cocooned figures lining the chamber's edges, dozens of aliens, still trapped in their glowing webs, their eyes flickering with faint awareness. "The captives," she said. "They're waking, but the hive's collapse could bury them. We free them, or they die." Jake nodded, cracking his knuckles. "Rescue mission it is. Let's bust them out before this place turns into a bug pancake." He glanced at the Sovereign, her claws scraping weakly at the floor, and added, "She's not looking too spry. Think she's done." Lena's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter as she studied the fallen queen. "Her mind's broken, but her body lives. She's weak, vulnerable. We can't leave her yet." "Fair enough," Jake said, pulling the mind bait from his belt. Its hum was softer now, battery low, but still flickered with a stubborn red light. "One more jolt oughta keep her down. Then we play hero." He adjusted the dial, aiming it at the Sovereign, and hit the trigger. A faint pulse shot out, and the Sovereign jolted, her head snapping up. "No more?" she rasped, her voice a wet gurgle. Jake grinned as a final wave of nonsense leaked from the device. Football scores, a jingle for Hive Insurance, and a fleeting image of Lena winking at him, silver skin bare and gleaming. The Sovereign's eyes dimmed, her body slumping fully, and she went still. "Night-night, Queenie," Jake muttered, clipping the mind bait back to his belt. "Sleep tight." The chamber shook again, a chunk of ceiling crashing down near the Sovereign's tail, and Lena grabbed his arm. Her touch was cool, firm, and sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the hive. "Now, Jake," she said, urgency sharpening her tone. "The tunnels, they're next." He nodded, shaking off the heat creeping up his neck. "Right behind you, darling." They bolted toward the nearest cocoon, a hulking figure with crystalline skin that shimmered faintly. Its eyes followed them, wide and aware, and Jake pulled a knife from his boot, slicing at the tendrils. They snapped like overstretched rubber, oozing sap, and the alien slumped forward, gasping in a language he didn't know. "Easy, big guy," Jake said, hauling it upright. "You're free. Don't thank me yet. This place is about to go boom." Lena moved to the next cocoon, her silver fingers tearing through the webbing with a strength that made Jake whistle low. "Damn, you're handy," he called, grinning as she freed a tentacled creature with sluggish, mechanical movements. "Remind me not to arm wrestle you." "Focus," she shot back, but there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. The chamber rumbled again, dust raining from above, and the captives stirred, some groaning, others clawing at their bonds as the hive's collapse woke them fully. Jake worked fast, cutting tendrils and dodging falling debris, his boots slipping on the slick floor. Each alien he freed stumbled toward the center, their forms a wild mix, crystalline, tentacled, feathered, scaled, all united by the terror in their eyes. Lena moved like a silver blur, her strength unshaken, and Jake couldn't help stealing glances. She was fierce, unstoppable, and damn if she didn't look good doing it, silver skin taut, muscles flexing, her breath quick and sharp. He pictured her in that bar memory, pressed close, her hands on him, and nearly dropped his knife. "Jake!" Lena's voice snapped him back, sharp and urgent. She pointed to a tunnel entrance, now half blocked by a collapsing arch. "That's our way out. We need to move them now." He nodded, shaking off the haze. "You heard the lady," he yelled at the growing crowd of freed aliens. "All ass, or whatever you've got, toward that tunnel. Double time." He grabbed a feathered alien struggling to stand, slinging its arm over his shoulder, and started for the exit. Lena took the lead, guiding the others, her silver form a beacon in the dimming light. The hive fought back. A tremor ripped through the floor, splitting it under Jake's feet, and he leapt aside, dragging the feathered alien with him. From the cracks, drones staggered out. Not the sleek soldiers from before, but warped, jerky things, their chitin cracked and oozing. "Looks like the B team's here," Jake muttered, firing his pistol. A bull took one in the head, dropping it, but more poured in, their claws slashing wildly. Lena spun, her hand outstretched, and a psychic pulse flared from her, faint but laced with Jake's chaos. The drones froze, twitching, one rasping, extended warranty before collapsing. Jake laughed, loud and wild. "That's my girl. Keep in guessing." She shot him a look, half exasperation, half something warmer, and pushed forward, clearing the path. The captives stumbled after her, their movements clumsy but desperate, and Jake brought up the rear, firing at drones as they launched. The tunnel loomed ahead, its mouth narrowing as the walls buckled, and his heart pounded, not just from the fight, but from her, silver and fierce, leading the charge. They hit the tunnel as the chamber caved behind them, a roar of collapsing flesh and stone swallowing the Sovereign's still form. Dust choked the air, and Jake coughed, shoving the feathered alien ahead. "Go, go!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. Lena reached back, her silver hand grabbing his, and pulled him through just as the entrance sealed shut with a wet crunch. The tunnel was tighter, its walls pulsing slower, the light a sickly gray. Jake leaned against the slick surface, catching his breath, and glanced at Lena. Her chest heaved, silver skin slick with sweat or sap. He couldn't tell, and her glowing eyes met his, steady and fierce. "You're still insane," she said, her voice soft but cutting through the hum. "Texas insane," he corrected, grinning despite the ache in his ribs. "Told you I've got your back." Her hand was still on his, cool and strong, and for a second he imagined pulling her close, feeling that silver warmth against him, her breath on his neck. He let it go, nodding at the captives huddled nearby. "They're safe for now. What's next?" Lena released him, stepping back, her gaze hardening. "The hive's core, it's deeper. We end this there, or it rebuilds." She paused, eyeing him. "You're with me? Till the wheels fall off, darling," Jake said, straightening up. "Let's finish this bug bash." The tunnel trembled, a low groan echoing from below, and the fight rolled on. The tunnel stretched ahead, a narrow vein of pulsing flesh and fading light, its walls trembling as if the hive itself knew its end was near. Jake Miller trudged forward, his boots squelching on the slick floor, plasma pistol in one hand, and a grin on his face that refused to quit. Lena led the way, her silver skin a beacon in the gloom, her glowing eyes cutting through the shadows like twin stars. Behind them, the freed captives huddled, a ragged band of aliens, their breaths ragged but their steps determined. The air was thick with the stench of rot and ozone, and every rumble from above reminded Jake they were racing a collapsing clock. "Core's close," Lena said, her voice steady despite the chaos they'd left behind. "I feel it, her last stronghold. If we destroy it, the hive dies for good." Jake nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sounds like a plan, darling. Blow it up, call it day, maybe grab a beer after. You drink beer?" He glanced at her, silver curves glinting as she moved, and his mind flickered to that imagined sunset. Her close, her hands on him, her breath warm. He shook it off, grinning wider. "Or whatever you Terran folks sip on." Lena's eyes flicked to him, a spark of amusement in their glow. "You never stop, do you?" she said, her tone dry but warm. "We survived this, and I'll consider it." "Deal," Jake said, winking. "Texas hospitality's on me." He checked the mind bait on his belt, its light dim but still flickering, and added, "Let's make sure Queenie's down for the count this time." "No encore." The tunnel widened into a cavern, and they stopped short. The hive's core loomed ahead, a massive, throbbing orb of flesh and light, suspended in a web of glowing tendrils. It pulsed like a heart, veins snaking out to the walls, and drones, smaller, weaker ones, scurried around it, their movements jerky and confused. At its base, the Hive Sovereign dragged herself upright, her chitin cracked, her antennae twitching faintly. She was a shadow of her former self, but her eyes still burned with a dying fury. "You persist," she rasped, her voice a wet croak. "Fools, my hive will rise again." Jake laughed, stepping forward with his pistol raised. "Rise? Lady, you're barely crawling. Time to cash out." He fired, the plasma bolt sizzling through the air, but a drone lunged, taking the hit and crumpling in a heap. More skittered toward them, claws clicking, and the captives flinched back. Lena's hand shot up, silver fingers flexing, and a psychic pulse rippled out, faint but sharp, laced with Jake's chaos. The drones froze, one muttering hot singles before collapsing. Jake grinned, spinning his pistol. "That's my girl. Keep him dizzy." The Sovereign snarled, slamming a claw into the core. It pulsed faster, cracks spreading through the floor, and a low groan echoed from the depths. "If I fall," she hissed, "you fall with me." The cavern shook, tendrils snapping free, and the captives scattered, some bolting for cover as debris rained down. "Shit," Jake muttered, dodging a falling chunk. "She's pulling a last stand." He grabbed Lena's arm, her silver skin cool under his grip, and nodded at the core. "We hit that thing hard. You got any juice left?" Lena's eyes flared, her breath quick. "Enough," she said, stepping closer. "But I need you mind. One last push." Her hand tightened on his, and that jolt hit him again, sharp, electric, and damn near distracting. He pictured her in that bar, silver instead of red, her hands sliding up his chest, and his pulse kicked up. "Anything for you, darling," he said, voice rough. "Let's finish this." He closed his eyes, digging into the last scraps of his mental arsenal, and let her have it all. Lena channeled it, her silver form glowing brighter, and a psychic wave erupted, pure Jake Miller madness. The Sovereign froze as a jingle screamed through her mind. "Call 1-800-HIVE-NOW," followed by a flood of spam. "Win a free ship. Just enter your galactic ID." Drones dropped mid-step, twitching, one rasping extended warranty before its legs gave out. Then came a knockout. Jake's imagination flared. Lena, free and fierce, stepping toward him in that Texas sunset, her silver body bare and shimmering. She pressed close, hands on his shoulders, lips brushing his ear with a whisper We're done here, cowboy. The Sovereign shrieked, claws slashing at nothing, as the image burned into her. This heat, she gasped, her voice breaking. This closeness, I cannot. The core pulsed wildly, cracks splitting its surface, and Lena thrust both hands forward. The final blow hit, a blast of Jake's bar memory, sweat and skin, mixed with a blurry clip of tangled figures, their gasps loud and raw. The Sovereign collapsed, her body crashing into the core, and it exploded in a burst of light and flesh, tendrils snapping like overcooked spaghetti. The cavern roared, walls caving in, and Jake grabbed Lena, pulling her back as the floor buckled. "Move!" he yelled, dragging her toward the captives. They bolted, dodging debris, the tunnel behind them sealing shut with a wet crunch. The hive's hum faded, replaced by silence, heavy, final, and sweet. They stumbled into an open chamber, dust settling around them, and Jake leaned against a wall, catching his breath. Lena stood beside him, silver skin slick with effort, her glowing eyes softening as she scanned the captives, safe, shaken, but free. "It's over," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "She's gone." Jake grinned, holstering his pistol. "Texas 1, Bug Queen Zilch. Told you I'd deliver." He turned to her, wiping dirt from his jacket, and added, "You're something else, darling. Hell of a partner." Lena stepped closer, her silver hand brushing his arm, and that cool, warm touch sent a shiver through him. "You're a mess, Jake Miller," she said, her tone warm, almost teasing. "But I owe you. We all do. Oh, me." He laughed, rough and easy. "Just doing my job, saving the galaxy one hot alien at a time." He paused, eyeing her, and his mind flickered again, her in that sunset, close and real. "So about that beer." She tilted her head, a real smile breaking through, fierce and bright. "We'll see," she said, then turned to the captives, rallying them with a grace that made his chest ache. "Cool me. We leave this place." Hours later, Jake stood on Klythera's surface, the second chances humming behind him as rescue ships, called by Lena's people, loaded the freed aliens. The sky was clearing, orange streaks fading to gray, and he leaned against his ship, watching her. She moved among her kind, silver and commanding, her voice carrying over the wind. She'd left him an old Terran comm device. For next time, she'd said, her eyes lingering, and he twirled it in his hand, grinning. Back in the cockpit, Maggie's voice crackled to life. "Mission accomplished, cowboy. Hive down, damsel saved." "Damn straight," Jake said, kicking his boots up on the console. 200 aliens free, 1 Bug Queen toast, and not a scratch on me. Well, not much. He smirked, replaying Lena's touch, her smile. "And I might have made a friend." "Friend," Maggie snorted. "You're panting like a dog in heat. She's trouble. You know that, right?" "Best kind," Jake shot back, laughing. "Set course for home, Mag. I need a shower and a cold one." The second chances lifted off, Klythera shrinking below, and a comm pinged. Lena's face flickering on the screen, silver and sharp. "Jake," she said, her voice cutting through the hum. "The Terran owe you, and I'll find you for that beer." He grinned, leaning back. "Looking forward to it, darling. Stay shiny." The screen blinked out, and he closed his eyes, her silver form lingering in his head. Real now, not just a dream. Word spread fast. Texas Man Syndrome, they called it. Telepathic species across the galaxy, steering clear of humans after tales of Jake's mind broke the Hive Sovereign. He scrolled a report on his holoscreen, chuckling. "Psychic hazard, huh? Best damn label I ever got." The ship hummed toward Earth, and Jake relaxed, a cold beer already calling his name. Somewhere out there, Lena waited, and that was a promise worth keeping.